Hello. What we're going to do today is make a tool cover, but I'm going to have a spine. This particular version is going to have a 1.5 inch spine. I'm cutting mine roughly 4 centimetres, which is almost 1.5 inches. What I hope to do in one of the future videos where we put the signatures in is provide a template for your inside and for your signature hole poking. So hopefully I'll get that sorted before we get that far. So I'm making my cover out of bookboard. Now I purchased this particular one, and I think this is 1500 microns from Shepherds of London. But please don't purchase things like this if you really don't need to, because this particular board here that I've already cut is actually thicker, and I'd say this is probably 2000 microns, which is probably about 2 millimeters, maybe a bit more actually. Let's have a quick look. Yeah, 2 millimeters. This is the back of a A3 tracing paper pad. You can use A4 paper pads, and if you're in the US and you've cut down, you've printed to fit, you'll be able to use the back of one of your pads. But this is obviously a much cheaper option than purchasing bookboard if you don't need to. So I'm going to show you what I did to create my book the right size. So I took one of my pages. Now I printed these at standard when you go to print, and that's usually 97%. So I'm going to have a little gap top, bottom and along the edge of mine, but all you need to do really is line your page up. Once you've folded it in half, line it up on your back, your board, and decide how much of a gap you want to do. And all you've really got to do is put a little pencil mark where you want it, and you're away. You can use your guides to cut, use your ruler to make measurements if you need to. I don't measure. I have a real issue with numbers. But what I did with mine is I'm going to leave my gap around the edge. So let's have a look. Mine is about 10.5 centimeters wide, and the full height. So this is an A3, so this is the same height as an A4 would be. So all I do is I'm going to use this edge because it's a little bit neater. So I'm lining it up with the straight edge along here. The reason I pre-cut some is because I have a bend in my desk, so it's really hard for me to cut anything accurately on film. So let's just line it up at the top here, which you might not be able to see, and at the bottom guide. So I use my top and bottom guides here to make sure I've got that correct. So I've gone 10.6 millimeters roughly, and then I take my knife when I know that's all square and just do a few cut marks until I go all the way through. It's better to do a few shallower cuts than try and get them all at once. Now, to make sure my covers are the same size, I line that up, take my pencil, run my pencil down, and then I want to cut onto the inside of this line. So I want to make sure I can see my pencil mark when I line up my ruler, and then I'm going to cut this one. And these, they are actually pretty similar, so I reckon these are both about 2 millimeters. This particular board that I also purchased from Shepherds of London is a 1 millimeter, so this is much thinner. I'll just show you, much thinner. I don't know if you can see that. It's about 1 millimeter thick, so you can just tell it's much more flexible. So this particular board I have cut my spine with, and my spine is, like I said, it's 1.5 inches, but I've cut it roughly 4 centimeters. Now they're not perfect because of the dip in my board, which is why I've pre-cut mine. One of them is accurate. This is the accurate one. That's the not so accurate one. So we've now got, once you've cut your spine, you should have your three pieces. Okay, so I've moved across to the messy side of my board. This particular piece we don't need to paint. We don't need to worry about that. What we need to do is paint around 3 of our edges, the 2 short edges and the longer edge. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to paint the very edge and just a small amount on the inside. And I'm using a jet black acrylic. I'll show you the one I'm using. It's the System 3 Mars Black. We just want to make sure we do all of these edges, because if the paper doesn't quite meet, we don't want this book board, this grey board, showing through. We don't have to paint too much, but we do want to paint a bit, and we do definitely want to make sure the edges are covered. It will also seal slightly that raw edge of the card. So I'll finish this and then I'll be right back. So now these are painted. I kind of dried one side and made sure the edges are covered, and painted the other side. So we're going to move back to the other area and we'll start working on the spine. The first thing I want to do is I'm going to line this up on my board and find the center. Okay, this is quite, so you can see I've got this middle line. Okay, let me move this up so you can just make that out a little bit more. And like I said, mine's 4 centimeters. If you're using inches, then you can of course use the other side of your board, because most of these are inches one side and centimeters the other. But that is now the center of this spine piece. So I'm going to line my ruler up with that center, being really careful not to move the spine itself. And I'm going to draw a little line all the way down the center. So I've now got a line down the center of my spine. You can see that's how much my desk is out. Right, now I am using a brown book cloth. It's paper backed. You can use any fabric or paper. You can make your own book cloth by using tissue paper and some iron bond. I don't know if you know the bonding stuff that will bond tissue paper to fabric. So you can do that and make your own book cloth if you want. Book cloth is it is actually not as easy to get hold of as you might think. I'm just going to straighten my camera. I want to try and make sure you can see what I'm going to do here. So my spine is, I'm going to grab my little, it's 1.5 inches. Okay, 1.5 inches. Now this is not going to show on the front and back cover, but it is going to show on the spine, and I want an overlap, and I want about 1.25 inches, and there's going to be one either side. So I need a total width of 4 inches. Okay, so I want a 4-inch wide piece of book cloth. Now, to make sure I've got the right height, I'm going to grab one of my covers and put it on. Now, I want a little bit of a gap here and a little bit of a gap here. So I'm just going to do this by eye. I'm going to use my ruler and just cut a piece of that off. I want to make sure my top and bottom line are square first of all. So I'm going to just line this straight edge up that I've just cut so I know it's straight. Hold this. And I'm going to cut that little trim off the bottom. So I now know the top and bottom are square. I'm going to line this up, lining that line up there, bring in my big ruler, and you can see how far out that actually is, but I'm going to trim that. This is an absolutely awful worktop. Right, I'm going to flip it over. I'm going to use my ruler. I'm going to put a line at 4 inches. And then I'm going to do the same the other end. Put my ruler on to line those up. And then I'm going to cut this. Right, so now I have my spine book cloth cut and ready to go. Now, the top and the bottom we're not going to see, okay? We don't want to crease the actual book cloth, but I'm going to put a crease halfway here, and I'm just going to reinforce that with a little pencil line. And I'm going to do the same the other side. And reinforce that with a pencil line. You are probably going to say this is a completely ridiculous way of doing this. It's just the way I do it. And I'm going to draw a line halfway. That's my halfway line. Now I want my spine. So my spine is here, and you can see I can line these up, and I know that's in the center. I've got my brush. I'm just going to dip that in some water and get most of the water off that. And I'm using a PVA fast dry time bookbinding glue. You can use any white glue. Doesn't have to be a bookbinding glue. So I'm going to open my glue, and I'm going to give the back of this a good coat. It needs to be a good coat, even, but don't overdo it. Turn that over, pop it down, making sure you've got a little bit of gap top and bottom, and those lines meet. So can you see? I just find that a much easier way to get a really good centered spine. Right, so we're back over to the messy side of my desk, and I want to make sure that it is clean, because we do not want to get any paint or anything like that onto our book cloth. It's fairly easy to clean, but we are going to have glue over the edge this time. Now what I want to do is just butt my ruler against the top of that spine and draw a line there and there, and do the same at the other end. That's so I know what's flat. This side, sorry about that. So what I did was just imagine this side is not here. Put the board down and make sure you're getting glue across the edge. Be careful not to move this too much onto that glue over here, because you don't want that glue on your book cloth. When it's wet, it will wipe off quite easily, but you don't want to have to, you know, clean your book cloth or have to, your fabric, whatever you're using. Move this over, clean that off, and I've left a gap here. I've just done it by eye, and you can do the same. You can use a spacer if you want. You just need to make sure the gap is big enough that you'll be able to close your book. I'm using the lines top and bottom. You can move it around to make sure you've got that even. Once you've got that even, what I'm going to do is use my baby wipe to just take out some of that spare glue and then just burnish that down. I'm going to turn it over, burnish the other side, and just put a little crease down the middle there, down the spine. I just need to wipe that away. Okay, so that's good. And now what we're going to do is I'm going to glue along here. Grab a clean baby wipe to wipe off that glue. And now I'm going to do exactly the same this side. You can take your time. It does dry fast, but it's not too fast that you're gonna lose it. So that is what we have. And we've got a nice good start to our cover. Now I'm gonna stay over here and try and make sure I keep the inside of that spine nice and clean. And I'm just going to explain about the cover pieces. Now, I've printed mine on 2 matte, heavyweight photo paper, and it's Epson. This is what it would look like if I was just printing at the normal standard 97%, and I would trim. But my printer is able to print full bleed, so I have printed my cover full bleed. So I'm going to take my ink, and I'm using ground espresso. Right, so they're inked. I'm going to put my glue brush into a baby wipe because I'm not going to be using bookbinding glue for this. I'm going to move on to my trusty art glitter glue. And what I want to do is make sure when I put these together, the edge of my page is flush with the edge of my cover. So let's hope my glue is going to come out. I'm going to go around the edge, making sure there's kind of a millimetre or so, because it will spread out and I don't want it to leak out. We'll have a clean baby wipe at the ready. Okay, so I'm going to turn my book on the side, take this, I'm going to use my fingers to get that to the edge. Make sure my bone folder is clean. Just going to turn it over and have a look. So I've got a little bit of here. I'm going to have to trim that, but that's okay. That's okay. So that's one half of our book cover. So now I'm going to do exactly the same for the other side, making sure I put that spine piece on the inside because you don't want to get that muddled up. Right, I had a bit of a glue mishap. The glue ran out, so I tried to refill it and had a bit of a spillage. And then when I've put this on, I've got a feeling some of the glue around the edges is actually already dried. So I'm hoping this is going to go well. Just going to wipe some of that glue, and you can see I actually didn't line this up very well. So I am going to, in a little while, take when this glue is dry, I'm not going to try and do this when the glue is wet, but I will actually trim off these little tiny pieces. There's a little bit here and a little bit at the bottom there. So there's a little bit of trimming to do, but I'll do that with a craft knife once this is completely dry. But there we have the start of our cover, or the main part of our cover actually. So what I'm going to do is I will be back in the next video, probably to put pages together, and then obviously after that we'll start on the ephemera, and we'll have to obviously compile the journal, but that will be done in another video. So that's how it will look. I mean, if this is too lighter brown for you, whatever fabric you're using, you can ink it, you can dye it, you can do whatever you want. But this is the start of my journal. I don't know which one's the top and what's the bottom. It doesn't really matter, I suppose. But there you go. That's the inside. That's the main part of our cover done. So thanks for watching. I will be back really soon with the next part. Bye.